Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about McDonald's, particularly the expansion potential. Let's go. The first topic I want to bring is a summary, because with the summary you should have a clear picture of the whole content of today. The first topic is of the summary is the US is the benchmark of restaurants per 100k people, with a value of around 4. The second topic is China is one third to one half of the potential restaurant count upside of McDonald's. And the last one topic is almost all of the restaurant count growth comes from developing countries, and those developing countries have low ARPUs, so average revenue per user. It's a term stolen from Facebook. McDonald's is probably the best restaurant franchising ever made. It has one of the most recognized brands in the world, built with convenience and a unique flavor. Yet, if we are to going to buy the stock, the company, we still need to price it according to today's situation and future prospects. If we expect McDonald's top and bottom lines to grow in the future, it has to come from somewhere. That somewhere can be the typical three: pricing power, volume, and mix. And uh, shout out to the book Quality Investing by Lawrence Cunningham, because he engraved these typical three sources of growth and revenue. Um, and today we're going to be looking at one of them, and that one is volume growth. There are a couple of ways for volume growth to materialize. The first one is selling more in existing restaurants, and the second one is having more restaurants. Uh, for example, my city has three McDonald's with a total population of 200k, and that means 1.5 restaurants per 100k people. Is there really more space for another McDonald's? And the United States data says probably yes, but we'll go into it now. The data that I will be referencing has a couple of sources, and you can check them on the written post at stockpickinginsights.com. You will see there a table with lots of countries, and in that table you will see restaurants per 100k people, and you will also see that the United States has one of the highest number when it comes to restaurants per 100k people. And as we've said in the summary, it's around 4.27. And in my opinion, this is the benchmark for the rest of the world, because I consider the US to be a saturated market when it comes to McDonald's restaurants. Now let's do some sensitivity analysis with the data, with the top 10 data that I was referring to. The analysis that I will talk about excludes India for conservatism, and that is, for example, due to its cow slaughter restrictions. And India is a country worth mentioning because it's a huge one, but we will exclude that one. In other words, we're assuming that expansion in India will be limited, fruit of the constant controversy around beef. I will also assume that restaurants per 100k people won't contract for in the US, as it represents a flagship market and a very sticky one. So I'm assuming that it will stay as it is. And if we do a sensitivity analysis, you have the table in the written post. You will see that for restaurants per 100k people, you have a potential of 23,000 restaurants. So if you assume that every country in the world will have one restaurant, one McDonald's per 100,000 100k people, that means 23 68,000 restaurants. And what's worth mentioning about that number is that China contributes to half of that growth. So half of the 23,000 restaurants would be in China potentially. And that means an absolute growth in sales of 1.7 times. Then if you go to two restaurants per 100K, you arrive at the number of 68,000 new restaurants, with 40% being China. Uh, Three restaurants per 100K gives you 112,000 restaurants per 100K people. Sorry, 112,000 new restaurants in total, with a third being China around that. And we're now talking about absolute growth top line of 4x. And finally, the ideal never achieving situation is 4 restaurants per 100K people, which is saying the same as saying that every country will be like the United States, which of course it won't. But that would give you an ideal 156,000 new restaurants, with a third of it being China. So there's very conservative estimates in this sensitivity analysis. And I'm talking about the one restaurant per 100K people. And there's also very unrealistic numbers for this sensitivity analysis, which is the 4 restaurants per 100K. I think it will be somewhere in the middle in the future. But my point is that there is growth potential here. Um, and again, it should be noted that the results above are very conditioned by a single country, which is China, because China has a lot of population. And if Chinese consumption of McDonald's doesn't pick up, McDonald's expansion upside becomes more very more limited, because they are responsible for one third to one half of the potential growth. Let's take a reasonable scenario of 2 restaurants per 100K people worldwide. If we do that, we're looking at around 2 to 3x restaurant count growth. And that's 2x if you don't consider China. This assumes a restaurant count of 35,000 today, and this is based on the data that I'm giving you in the written post. But restaurant count growth isn't exactly dollars. So how do we translate volume growth, the restaurant count growth, into dollars? And you have another table in the written post. And that table shows you 80% of the growth in restaurant count, considering 2 restaurants per 100K. And you will see countries like China, Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil, Russia. And those countries are the top 5 in the growth that we're talking about in restaurant count. And again, China is almost 40% of that. But the main point here is that much of the growth in restaurant count comes from developing countries. And we know that because they are developing countries, it's their nature. They don't have as much spending power, and they have low ARPUs by definition. And unfortunately, the 10K doesn't show ARPUs per geography, the McDonald's 10K. But so we can forecast clear numbers, but we know that we're forecasting restaurant growth in terms of total number of restaurants, but the revenue may not follow that number because the RPUs are from developing countries. And to sum it up, Based on this information, I wouldn't expect restaurant count growth to translate into significant top line and bottom line growth. That's simply because the developing countries being the source of growth. To expect otherwise would be to expect that these countries' purchasing power would be catching up with McDonald's average ARPU, which contains 50% of US weighting, because 50% of McDonald's sales are US and they have high ARPUs. Looks like we should look for growth elsewhere in McDonald's unless China expansion materializes, or in a very ideal scenario, the developing countries responsible for growth um, become developed countries. And to before I leave you, I will give you some action points as we've been doing lately. Uh, Basically, it's a few questions for you to think about when analyzing your portfolio. And the first one is, how is McDonald's China expansion working out? If you care about McDonald's, which I'm assuming you do. And the last one is, what top line growth do I expect of McDonald's? And where will it come from? That's it, guys. If you like the content, subscribe, and we'll see you next week.